Hi and welcome to section 2.6 for Econ 2 on the AQA exam board. What will we see today? Today we're going to be looking at the supply curve, producer surplus and price elasticity of supply. So first, what is supply? Supply is the quantity of a good or service that producers are willing and able to supply to the market at a given price over a given period of time. A supply schedule can be created to show how producers respond when there is an increase or a decrease in the price of their good or service. An example of a supply schedule can be seen on the website under this video. The normal supply curve is upward sloping from left to right and looks like this. But why does the supply curve slope upwards from left to right? One reason is that higher prices imply higher profits, and this provides an incentive for existing firms to expand their production. Also, higher prices sends a signal to other firms and provides an incentive for new firms to enter into this market. As new firms enter into the market, more goods and services are produced. So the first reason is that existing firms produce more if the price rises, and the second reason is that as the price rises, other firms move into this industry and start to produce these goods and services. Furthermore, as a firm increases their production, they experience diminishing marginal returns from the additional factors of production that they use. This causes the marginal cost to increase, meaning that a higher price is needed in order for the firm to bring more goods to the market and make normal economic profit. This is why the supply curve is upward sloping. So as existing firms increase their production, their marginal costs increase, which means that they must have a higher price in order to bring more goods and services to the market. So like with demand, a change in the price results in a movement along the supply curve. We also have shifts in the supply curve that come about due to a variety of factors, such as a change in technology. An advancement in technology would increase the productivity of a firm. Productivity is a measurement of input to output. If productivity rises, then a firm is able to produce more output from a given amount of input. This lowers the cost of production for each unit, meaning that the firm is able to supply more of a certain good or service at the same price level. We represent this by an outward shift in the supply curve. Any productivity improvement or technological advancement will have this effect, and there would be an outward shift in supply. Another factor that would cause a shift in supply is a change in the production cost. The best example of a production cost change would be a change in the price of oil. Oil is in composite demand, meaning that it is demanded for many different uses. An increase in the price of oil would make production for firms more expensive. This is because oil is needed for the transportation of goods, and it is also used in the production of goods. This would result in firms being less willing to supply the goods to the market, or for the same quantity they would demand a higher price. This results in the supply curve shifting to the left. The opposite would be true if there was a decrease in the price of oil or a decrease in any other production cost. If this was the case, then supply would shift outwards as production becomes cheaper and firms are more willing to supply goods to the market. Another factor is government policies. Governments can place taxes or subsidies on producers. If they place a tax on the producers, this means that it's more expensive for firms to bring goods or services to the market. This tax causes the supply curve to shift inwards. A subsidy has the opposite effect, and if a subsidy was placed on a good or service, it would mean that firms are more willing to supply this good to the market, and this causes the supply curve to shift outwards. So a positive shock will result in the supply curve shifting outwards, and a negative shock will result in the supply curve shifting inwards. The change must be a shock, because if firms had expected it, then they would have already factored this change into their supply curve. Here we have a diagram to show this. A positive shock, such as a decrease in the price of oil, would cause the supply curve to shift outwards from S to S1. And a negative shock, such as a tax on the production of a good, will cause the supply curve to shift inwards, so from S to S2. This brings us on to producer surplus. Producer surplus is the difference between what producers are willing to supply a good for and the price that they receive for that good. We care about producer surplus because it is a component of economic welfare, along with consumer surplus and government surplus. Suppose that we have a supply curve in this market of supply, and a price in the market is P. As a price of P, we're going to assume that firms will be selling a quantity of Q. We can work out the revenue for firms by multiplying the price and the quantity that they produce. So the price is OP and the quantity they produce is OQ. This leads to an area of revenue for firms of OPEQ. We can view the supply curve as the marginal cost curve, and the area under this curve is the cost for the firm. So for these firms to bring a quantity of Q to the market, the cost to these firms will be the area OEQ. This is the area that firms are willing to supply a good to the market for. So producer surplus is the difference between what producers are willing to supply a good for, which is OEQ, and the price that they receive for the good, which is OPEQ. So we take what they are willing to supply the good to the market for from the revenue for the firms, which leaves us an area OPE. And this is the area of producer surplus. The area for producer surplus is indicated by the yellow triangle on the diagram. So now let's have a look at price elasticity of supply. Price elasticity of supply measures the responsiveness of supply to a change in the price. The formula to work out price elasticity of supply is price elasticity of supply equals percentage change in quantity supplied divided by the percentage change in the price. So let's have a maths example. Suppose that the price in the market was to increase by 10%. This price increase causes firms to increase their production from 100 to 140. So to work out price elasticity of supply, we do percentage change in quantity supplied divided by percentage change in price. The percentage change in quantity supplied is 40%. We get this figure from doing 140, which is the new quantity, minus the original quantity, which is 100. Then we divide it by the original quantity, which is 100, and multiply by 100. This gives us a value of 40%. The percentage change in the price is given in the question, and that is 10%. Therefore, price elasticity of supply is 4, because we do 40% divided by 10%, which gives you 4. But what does this value actually mean? Here we have a number line for price elasticity of supply values. The first thing to say is that price elasticity of supply is usually positive. This is because as the price increases, we expect firms to bring more goods and services to the market. This is for the reasons that we stated earlier, such as a higher price implies higher profits. These higher profits encourage existing firms to supply more goods to the market, and a higher profit provides an incentive for new firms to enter the market. Therefore, a rise in the price causes an increase in the quantity, so we have a positive divided by a positive, which gives us a positive value. A value for price elasticity of supply between 0 and 1 means that supply is inelastic. This means that a change in price will be met by a small change in quantity. A inelastic supply curve will be fairly steep and will look something like the diagram below. A value for price elasticity of supply that is greater than 1 means that supply is elastic. And with elastic supply, an increase in price will result in a large increase in the quantity supplied. An elastic supply curve will be fairly flat. We can also have some extreme values of price elasticity of supply, such as a value of 0, which means that supply is perfectly inelastic. This means that output will not change depending on the price of the good. An increase in demand for that good or service will not change the quantity supplied and will only increase the price in that market. An example of this would be tickets for a concert or a football game. This is because there is a set capacity and the tickets will be rationed out by who is willing to pay the most. The other extreme value for price elasticity of supply is when it has a value of infinity. We call a supply curve with a PES value of infinity perfectly elastic. This is where firms will produce as many goods and services as individuals demand, providing that the price that suppliers desire has been met. So, to summarise, a PES value of 0 means that supply is perfectly inelastic. A value of PES between 0 and 1 means that supply is inelastic. A value above 1 but less than infinity means that supply is elastic. And a value for PES of infinity means that supply is perfectly elastic. As the value for price elasticity of supply increases, the supply curve becomes flatter. So we're seeing that different supply curves can have different price elasticities of supply, but why is this? Here are some factors that affect the price elasticity of supply. The first one is spare capacity. If firms have spare capacity, then they can easily increase output without a huge rise in costs. This would result in the supply curve being fairly elastic and fairly flat. In a recession, firms tend to produce below full capacity, resulting in the supply of goods and services becoming more elastic. When looking at a supply curve, it is important to remember that the elasticities are constantly changing as we move along the supply curve. So it could be the case that the supply curve starts off fairly flat as firms have spare capacity, and as they approach full capacity, the supply curve becomes steeper and starts to become more inelastic. Another factor influencing price elasticity of supply is stock levels. Some industries have higher level of stocks than others. These industries are able to accommodate increases in demand for that good or service without a huge rise in price. So if stock levels are high, the supply curve in the market is likely to be more elastic. Another factor influencing price elasticity of supply is the number of producers. Where there is more producers, the supply curve will be more elastic. A final factor that we will look at is the supply period and production speed. For example, let's have a look at the supply of eggs. The supply of eggs is fairly elastic as there is a short time span from chickens producing eggs and egg-related products reaching the market. If there was to be a huge increase in the price of eggs, farmers would purchase more chickens or breed more chickens and therefore increase the quantity supplied in the market. Whereas in agriculture, the momentary supply is fixed, as it has been determined by planted decisions made months before the harvest and months before these goods reach the market. The price elasticity of supply for agriculture goods is fairly inelastic.